Congregation tonight. Thank you for tuning in. We are going through a series in the book of Acts, and here we are, Acts chapter 22. And looking back at the history of this, we see that Paul had been questioned about his ministry as a Jew. He was questioned in the sense of inclusion of the Gentiles being brought into the temple. I mean, really, could we argue about anything anymore? There was the court of the Gentiles, and they were supposed to say, you can come worship, but that's as far as you can come, not to be brought into the temple. Stand outside, do whatever, you can hear it, but you are not allowed in here. Can you imagine such segregation of not allowing Gentiles in? And yet what happened is whenever, if you remember, Paul was he's on his third missionary journey. Here he comes. He's been sailing down, and he's had word made after word. People who he had first encountered coming up to him and saying, don't go to Jerusalem. Don't go. If you do, you're in for I just feel impressed upon my spirit. The Lord's laid on my heart to tell you, it's going to be a difficult time when you get to Jerusalem. Now, the Lord never told him not to go, but he didn't tell him it was going to be easy when he got there. Did Paul do what God instructed him to do, or did he do what he wanted to do? I'll leave that up for your questioning time when you get to heaven and talk to Paul. I don't know. And I'm not going to be so bold to say, because we know God redirected Paul in his journeys. At times, when he felt impressed to do one thing, the Lord laid on his heart to do something else, and he was obedient to do that. But he was determined to go to Jerusalem. So when he goes to Jerusalem, he encounters and meets James. This is the James that was really the overseer or the pastor of the church at Jerusalem. This James was not the James that was killed early on in the book of Acts. This James is the son of Mary and Joseph. Yes, Mary and Joseph had other children after Jesus was born. Mary and Joseph having these children, James says to Paul, said, look, there's some rumors about you with these Gentiles. Are they true, James? Or he starts talking about them. Look, you're trying to teach something contradictory in the whole bringing them in circumcised and uncircumcised. Man, this has been a topic all throughout the book of Acts. And he said, you're going to get called to question on this. Let's just go ahead, as Barney Fife would say, let's nip it in the bud. Let's just get this out in the open. How about, I got 4 guys that's willing to take a vow. How about you take them down to the temple? Oh, wait a minute. Can they come in? Well, they should. They're Jews. These was Jews. And they have a vow. Why don't you go down and you take a vow with them, and hey, Paul, while you're at it, why don't you pay for it? James is smart, isn't he? He's a pretty crafty guy. He gets Paul to agree to this, to say, I'll go down to the temple. I'll identify that I'm still a Jew. I'm just a Jew that loves Jesus. I'm not trying to preach and teach something contradictory to being a Jew. I'm just trying to point people to Jesus. That's what Paul has been saying all along. And he says, if I become all things to all men, that I might win some. Paul never quit trying to be what he's doing. Now, was he wishy-washy? Did he compromise some of the Old Testament legalism and laws for what the Gentiles didn't have to do? He wasn't doing anything wrong. He went to take a vow. Many have stated that this was even perhaps a Nazirite vow. And as he goes into the temple, brings these 4 guys in. Remember, Gentiles are not allowed in, but he brings these guys in, and rumor starts. Be careful with rumors, folks. And be careful with assumptions when you don't know the whole facts, when you don't know the whole truth of the story. Here, he's coming out of the temple. He's had these 4 individuals. He's come in, performed a vow. And there's certain Jews from Asia who make an accusation against him. They attack him saying, hey, He's the one that's bringing Gentiles into the tabernacle. Wow. No proof. And I'd hate to even ask how they'd have to go and seek proof to find out if they're really Jews or not. No proof. They attack him. They go after him. It's rumored with accusations, but really no evidence, and no trial. But thankfully, the Roman soldiers heard all the commotion, so they shut the door. And Paul's looking around, and they put a beat down on Paul. Paul had a rough ministry. Physically, spiritually, and emotionally. These was Jews. He was a Jew. He's back in Jerusalem. This was a moment that he had been so looking forward to and so excited about. He had heard, everybody told him you're in for a beatdown, but it was at a moment whenever he was least expecting it. And it was when he was walking out of the temple. Folks, I can't tell you, and it's not about me, I'm just preaching the sermon here, but how many times after such wonderful church services, when God did something amazing, I've seen people get saved, people come and join, everything is going, and it's just a wonderful time. And I guess that's at the moments when I'm most vulnerable, and someone goes out the door and boom, something hits me like, where in the world did that come from? I was not ready for that. I wasn't expecting this. The devil knows those vulnerable moments, and that's whenever he works in those wounds and so forth. Here Paul is coming out of the tabernacle. Wonderful day, wonderful day. We've made a vow. Wonderful time. They're walking out, and then boom, pow, zip, bang. He is under attack. To such a degree, the Roman soldiers. Now, there's extra guards that would have been brought in for feasts and tabernacles and things like this. And here we have all the guard is going to run and catch him. They're going to pull Paul apart from them, have to hoist him up, carry Paul out of there, get him away from these Jewish people, trying to get him up some steps. We could probably pinpoint where exactly he's at there in Jerusalem by going up this step and stairwell. And as he's walking up the steps, he turns to the Roman guard and speaks in his language. And he says, I got something to say. And the guy hears him talk in his language, the Roman guard does. He hears him talking in his language and says, you're not just some uneducated person here. You can speak you can talk here. What is it? And he says, they're closing out in chapters 21. He's basically saying Paul, he's being led away by the chief captain. And he said, can I speak unto them? He said, can you speak Greek? And he said, are there not the Egyptians? See, he was accused of being the Egyptian. No. But there had been an Egyptian who had been creating quite the disturbance, in fact, had been cast out. That he was just under the rumors and the assumptions that this was a guy who had come to stir up trouble. He must have come back, and he's a rebel rouser. And you're the one that was out there in the wilderness coming to. Are you not the one that for thousands of men were murderers? But Paul said, I'm not that guy. Listen to what he said there in closing out 21 verse 39. Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city of Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. And when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand for the people. And when they were made great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue. Paul could speak multiple languages. He spoke their language. This was something, he's speaking Greek to the chief commander, but he says, I've got something to say. What a moment. I don't know about you, but if somebody, my own people, if I went back to where I grew up and I tried to preach to them and they're like, Jason, we know you, and we're just going to beat you up for all the things you did when you was a kid. We're just going to beat you up and throw you out here. I'd be like, guys, get me out of here and get me away from them. But you know what he says? No. These are my people, and I need to talk to them. This is a platform. This is an opportunity for me to preach. This is an opportunity for me to tell them about Jesus. Oh, what a wonderful opportunity Paul has. And instead of seeing it as an opportunity to be beat down and just lash out at them and say, y'all a bunch of losers, I'm the only one, y'all never amounted to nothing, I'm up here, you're down there. He didn't do that. He's saying, hey, I was once exactly where you are. You don't get anywhere by creating division. You got to find unity. And Paul's approach to talk to his people is to identify as one of the people. He said, I've been where you are. I mean, so there we are. So that's my heck of a introductory here for chapter 21 to go into 22 tonight. But I want you to see, Paul tells the Jewish upbringing and his background. Now he's going to turn to the crowd. He's got a platform. He's got a pulpit. He's up on the stairs and he's overlooking them all. And now he's going to teach them in Hebrew tongue. They were shocked when he spoke to them in Hebrew. They listened. They heard what I mean. Can you? People that want to argue, and it's I don't mean to downplay on the culture, but they just people just wanted to argue. And when he starts to speak, just for there to be a hush over the crowd to hear what he had to say, that in itself is very, very impressive. I'm not going to camp there long, but listen to how he addresses them. Chapter 22, verse 1 says, Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I made now unto you. You know how he's addressing them? He is addressing them the same way that it was addressed. He's addressing them the same way back in Acts chapter 7, verse 2, as Stephen did. You remember Stephen, the one that he held their coats while they stoned him? What he said back in Acts chapter 7, verse 2 said, and he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham, and when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan. That's what Stephen said to him. I bet Paul, in his mind, every day thinking back how he just stood by and let Stephen be stoned. I'm sure he recorded and rehearsed the words that Stephen said. How he looked up and how he had the face of an angel and how he was rejoicing to die. As many times as Paul was in the scene, he rehearsed and said the same words as what Stephen did when he was in a similar situation. Men, brethren, and fathers, hear me. Let me give my defense. In verse 2, we see here, I'm going to go and read verse 2. And he said, Men, brethren, fathers, hearken, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. That was Acts 7 and 2. And verse 2 and 3 says, And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he saith, Hey, I'm verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city of Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God as ye are this day. Paul is speaking as a Jew, talking to Jews, and he's careful to find and meet them on common ground. Many times people know what we stand against, but they don't know what we stand for. We've got to realize that we are, we got to remember where we used to be. We got to remember where we stood. We got to know that you've got to be able to relate to people and really get on their level. I like what Rick said this morning in his sermon. He said he went to go do a youth emphasis, and he spiked his hair up and put on the cool clothes and all, and he goes to talk to youth, and he finds out he's there with people his own age. He was trying to relate to people, and I think that it's, you have to relate to people. I could go into this on great lengths and just give you great illustrations, but you have to be able to be someone to say, hey, can I do business with you or not? That's why bankers used to be out every Friday. That's why businessmen was out every Friday. Why? Because they was out on the golf greens, and they were out there, and they were talking. They were either having dinners and communicating. Let me tell you, you know why? If you get in the business mindset and you get in the business world, people had already decided if they wanted to do business with you before they ever sat down at the round table. If I can't talk to you, if I can't relate to you, if I can't trust you, we do the same thing with a doctor. You know, isn't it something whenever the doctor comes in, they're more personable, they're more able to be relatable, and you're like, look, I don't know if they're going to be, but I like them, or I don't like them, you know. You just got to have that relationship. He's just trying to find some common ground with them. And also, look what he said there. Paul notes that he was born outside the promised land. He said, look, I know that I wasn't born in Jerusalem. I know I'm not from here. I was born in Tarsus. But it wasn't no mean city. It wasn't a bad place. We were a peaceful people. And folks, I'll say this, even being here in Nancy, and as much as you all have made me feel welcome, you know, most churches, and not just here in Nancy, but most churches, is if you wasn't born there, if you're not from there, it doesn't matter how long you've been there, you're always looked upon as, well, you're not from here. I could be here for 20 years and say, well, but you're not from here. But if my kids was born here, well, they're from here. Do you understand where I'm going with it? It's hard to be relatable with people because you're not from here. He's saying, look, I'm not from Jerusalem, but I love Jerusalem. I love it here. I'm from Tarsus. It was no mean city. In fact, if you do some research on Tarsus, Tarsus was a city that actually, if you were from Tarsus and from that background, you were given Roman citizenship because it was a peaceful city that had obliged and accommodated the Romans. So moving on, he goes on to say, look, I am outside the promised land, but I was brought up in Jerusalem. This is where I moved to. This is where I'm from, even though I wasn't born here. And I sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He was one of the most prestigious rabbis of his day. So he's trying to pull out his pedigree by saying, what right do you have? Look, I'm just a nobody who knows somebody who loves everybody. But what he's trying to pull out here is saying, look, this is the degrees, and this is the doctrine, and this is where I come from. This is where I went to school. Most people say, well, where did you go to school at? I sat at the feet of Gamaliel. And they're like, really? You went there? You went to school at that place? You sat under him? He was one of the most influential teachers of his day. And he's like, yeah, that's who I came up under. I was going to be the next Gamaliel. I was next in line. But something happened to me along the way. Paul makes it clear in verse 3 when he says, I'm verily a man which was a Jew born in Tarsus. He says, still I serve God, still serve the God of our fathers. He had not rejected Judaism. Judaism had rejected Jesus Christ. He said, look, I'm a good Jew. I served as a Jew. I've wanted to be a Jew. But I'm a Jew that understands who Jesus Christ was. Then let's look at verses 4 and 5. He said, I persecuted this way unto death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. I didn't care. As also the high priest doeth bear me witness. You can go and you can look up records on this. The high priest gave me witness that all the estates of the elders, from whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished. I was just as bad as you are. What you're doing to me, I did to others. And some of us would just say, well, I deserve it. I deserve it. I know, you know what really does any of us deserve other than hell? But we've received grace. And he said, I know what you're doing to me, and I'm not holding you at fault for it. I think Jesus said those very same words whenever he was on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He was saying to them, I'm going to ask for forgiveness for them. The message is clear. Paul is saying, I understand why you attack me. I was once also an attacker. Paul had been a Christian for probably now at this time frame, probably for some 20 years. But he had never forgotten where he came from. And here's the other thing. He could still relate to them. Now, why have I put so much time on this just introductory part? I don't know how long you've been a Christian, but sometimes, and I find myself in this even more so, being saved now for a long time, being in the ministry now for a long time, can you relate to people who's not Christians? I wonder how good of a job we do with that. We put ourselves in the position of we have forgotten who we used to be. You know what the world acts like when they cuss and carry on? When you're at Walmart and you're in line and you hear things going on as you're in the drive-thru, or you just see people acting silly and stuff on TV. You know why they're acting like that? Because they're in the world. And we have forgotten we used to also be in the world. How else are you expecting them to act? You can't expect them to act like a Christian when they're not Christian. And we have forgotten. So can we do the same? Can we relate to people who are not Christians? Hey, I once too was a lost man. You once too was a lost woman. And do you look at them and just saying, my goodness, I just want to call the law and have you thrown in jail for the way that you're acting? Or do you see somebody who is lost? I think Rick did a great job of giving some illustrations to that this morning about, I want to also revert back to the flesh, but I need to have faith and let God be seen through me. You know, you may be we've heard this said, you may be the only Jesus some people ever sees because of the Jesus you have in you and how you treat others. You can set an example. Verses 6 through 11, and it came to pass that as I made my journey. Now here's what Paul, let me just, before I'm going to read verses 6 through 11, Paul is going to tell his testimony and how he encountered a supernatural experience about his salvation. And it came to pass that as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus, I'm going to Damascus, I'm out and I'm going to kill Christians. At noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul. That's what Paul's name was before he changed it. Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise, get thee up, and go to Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of the things which are appointed for thee to do. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came to Damascus. Here in verse 6 we see that he was he was a persecutor. He was going out, and yet he says something happened to me. I was going out to be a bad man. I was doing what I thought was a good thing, but something happened to me on the road to Damascus. There a great light shone around about me. Nobody could hear what was being said, but I could hear what was being said. But they saw that there was a bright light. Remember how we talked about that Paul was knocked off his horse? I don't see that there was no horse in the Scripture. I don't see a horse here. I'm not saying he wasn't on one, but it doesn't say that there was one, so don't assume things that aren't there. Paul was just traveling, and he fell to the ground, a bright light around him, and there Jesus stopped him, talked to him, blinded him. Now he was spiritually blind before, and now he's physically blind. He's so blind he can't see nothing. In fact, the men that was with him had to take Paul by the hand and lead him because of the brightness that had come upon his eyes. It was so bright he couldn't see anything. Verses 12 through 16. Paul is going to describe his response to the supernatural experience. This is what he did. Listen, what are you going to do with your conversion experience? Do you remember when you met Jesus? I don't know what road you was on, but I was on a bad road. I was on a road, I was splitting hell wide open. I can't forget what God brought me from. I don't want to forget that God brought me from the depths of hell. And I'm so thankful for the road that I'm on, but we can't be no good to folks if we forget where God brought us from. Amen? Listen, we were all sinners, saved by grace. I encountered Jesus Christ. I hope and pray you've encountered Jesus Christ. And now my walk is different. I want to walk spiritually enlightened and not spiritually blinded. And I want to see Him for everything that is within me. But yet I needed help. I needed some direction. I didn't really have anybody to help guide me and lead me initially. But I'm glad God put people in my path. Here, Paul's going to have somebody put in his path. His name's Ananias. And one, Ananias, in verse 12, a devout man, according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me, and he stood, and he said unto me, Brother Saul. I love what he said. Did you note that? Brother Saul, receive thy sight. In the same hour I looked up upon him. And he said, The God of our fathers hath chosen thee, for that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one that shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men what thou hast seen and heard. And now why tarriest here? Arise, get baptized, go wash away the sins, and calling on the name of the Lord. You know, Ananias, I have so much admiration for Ananias. He was a good man, but did you know Saul was a very bad man? And could you imagine how hard it must have been for the Lord to lay it on Ananias' heart to say, hey, I got somebody I want you to go talk to. Who? Who would you like me to go witness to? His name's Adolf Hitler. I want you to go talk to him and witness to him. Excuse me? His name was Saddam Hussein. Wait a minute. You want me to go talk to who? You want me to go talk to the worst criminals in prison? And I could go through a bunch of names. You want me to go talk to who? You want me to go see what? How willing would you be able to go witness to somebody who is one of the most vile people that you'd ever heard of? You want me to go talk to who? God says, I got a job for you to do. He goes and he talks to this individual, Paul, and Paul has had a conversion experience. And there he's saying, I'm a Jew, but there's something more. And he's not denying his heritage. He's telling this crowd, Paul's telling the crowd, said, look, I was a Jew going to do bad things. Here was a Jew, Ananias, that was doing good things. And together he showed me the way, just like I'm trying to show you the way. In Paul's speech, we see he and Ananias are both simply trying to be good Jews. And you know, that's the duty of every believer. We're to be good Christians to everybody we come in contact with. Verses 17 through 21. Paul describes his first visit to Jerusalem after his conversion. You know, Paul wasn't really well accepted. But let's look at what he says here in verse 17. And it came to pass that when I was come again to Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance. And I saw him saying unto me, make haste, and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem. For they will not receive the testimony concerning me. Some people can't get over your past. I'm going to pause right here on that. Some people can't get over your past. Even Jesus himself said a prophet's not welcome in his own country. It's hard. It's hard for people to understand there's a new you. It's hard for people to say, hey, you're not the same old party animal you used to be. You're not the same old cussing sinner that you used to be. You've changed. There's been a change in your life, but many a time people want to just get you to reflect and talk about all the crazy things you used to do. I'm afraid sometimes people talk about their past so much that they miss it. If I'm not mistaken, how many of y'all, did anybody in here go to the class reunion down here yesterday? No? Okay. I think, wasn't there a class reunion at Nancy? I know there was a class reunion here last night for Sandra's age, whenever she graduated. You know what? Often if you see somebody you went through a time or a trial together, especially in high school, you go back, you're often remembered for that one weird old night that you had or something, and they always say, you remember that time or this or that. They always want to drudge up the old stuff. They always want to drudge up the bad. You can say, yeah, when I was a child, I acted like a child. But I've changed, and I'm not the same person anymore. I'm a new creature in Christ, and yes, I confess I did some things, but you know what? I'm doing some things, and I'm trying to move forward. Paul's saying, yes, I know this, but they would not let his past go. They wouldn't let it go that he used to be a murderer. They wouldn't let it go that he was a killer. They wouldn't let it go that he was legalistic. They wouldn't let it go. And therefore, the Jews would not hear him. So the Lord laid it upon his heart to say, I want you to go take my message to the Gentiles. When he said that, man, they got upset. That Jewish crowd that was out there listening to Paul when he's talking, he was doing good until he said that. Remember what they got upset about in the first place? Accusing him of bringing Gentiles into the tabernacle. That's what they got mad about. He was even talking about Jesus. And they didn't get upset like he had whenever he went in other places and tried to teach. And now here he is getting accused by teaching the Gentiles. I also want to go back and I want to pause. Paul tried to give his testimony on many an occasion. And you know what? Your testimony is your testimony. I can't get over getting saved. I can't read this and not be selfish. I know this is a message for all. But I cannot read these passages when I read about Paul's conversion and not think about what God did in my own conversion, in my own life. I can't get over getting saved. I don't want to get over getting saved. It's my phone. I got a new phone. Praise the Lord. If it rings, we'll answer it. I just want you to pause here. I want to pause here for a moment, and I am going to go back to my testimony. You're saying, I've heard it, Brother Jason. Paul said, if you've heard it, you get to hear it again, because I can't get over getting saved. I'll never forget, I was on a road. I was on a bad road. I knew in my life and in my path, and I don't want to go all that. Some people want to spell out their bad words. I didn't know Christ, but He knew me, and I went to church because there was a girl there. I had hair down the middle of my back. Not to say having hair is wrong. I miss my hair. I'd like to have some more. I had a couple pair of pants. Y'all don't remember working on cars. I built my car out of a junkyard. I love cars. I do. I just like cars. I built my car out of a junkyard. I worked all summer with my real dad, and I bought my car, bought it out of a junkyard. It was a wonderful, wonderful old car. You ever had vice grips for windshield crank on your door? I mean, really, I had vice grips to roll up my window. Roll it down. Here, honey, have a seat. Let me get my tools out of your seat for you so you can sit down. I mean, it was really the kind of way. I did not look the fit to go out with this church girl, but yet I'm so thankful. I went to that youth group meeting. I was 16. Went to that youth group meeting. It was a lock-in, and I still believe in lock-ins. And while there, that youth minister, it was at midnight on a New Year's Eve, and I'll never forget that he presented and shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with me, and I'm so thankful for that. I've never gotten over getting saved. I'll never get over that overwhelming feeling. I was shocked. I was bewildered. Just to think what Jesus Christ did for me, I was overwhelmed. And I accepted Jesus that night, and I was weeping uncontrollably. I've seen people get saved and laugh. I've seen people come up out of the baptism and shout and holler, and I've seen them come up crying. I've seen people just respond in different ways. For me, I was shaking. I mean, to the point that it was like a grieving, uncontrollable, when you see somebody at a funeral who's lost a dear, dear loved one. I was so consumed with what God did for me. And to the point that the man that just led me to the Lord, he thought something was physically wrong with me. And he said, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" And I had no other reason to say this. And I said, "I believe God is calling me to preach." And he looked at me, and I still see his eyes, and I still see him go down to my pants, ripped up pants, and coming back up, and said, "No, he's not." He was no Ananias. He wasn't even nice. I forgive him. But he looked at my outward appearance, and he did not see what God was doing in my heart. God saved me and called me at that exact same time frame. I know he did. Nobody can ever take that away from me. What Paul's saying is the exact same thing. I was saved, and I was called and set aside by a special purpose by Jesus Christ. It doesn't make me any better than you. I'm not trying to say it in that fashion. I just know that God set me aside for a certain purpose. I know he did. I've had many a distraction. I know that I have. But when I read this in Paul's testimony, I just think that he said, when he told me to go, I went. And he did, and I'm thankful that I have had many an Ananias come in my life and help me along the way. And yet, he said, because they don't want to hear you here, I'm going to send you, well, people will hear you. Verses 22 and 23. He says, and they gave him an audience unto this word, and then lifted up their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. Man, why? Because he's trying to preach to Gentiles, remember? They were listening to him until he said he started talking to Gentiles. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes, they threw dust in the air. Oh, won't they have a little fit? Not everyone will accept the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He tried to share it. He tried to present it. And they got mad, threw dirt up in the air, and so forth, things like that. And then in Acts 22, this Jewish mob, they expressed their hatred with such violence. But you know what? As angry as I see this crowd getting, by throwing up dirt, by getting mad, and by saying away with him and getting him out of here, you know what I think is even worse than that? Having the good news of the gospel and not sharing it. I think Paul would have been far more wrong if he had the antidote and never shared it. He shared it, and I think we should too, because whenever you don't share it, then you're just saying, why don't you just go perish in hell? And we often say it in a different way. When you say, I love you and I want to tell you about Jesus, if they don't hear it, that's up to them. But if you have it and you share it, here he had that platform. Verse 24, the chief captain commanded him to be brought up into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging. Wow, that's great, isn't it? We're going to check you out. We're going to put you under the spotlight. So we're going to torment you here a little bit, Paul. We're going to squeeze the truth out of you. How did they do that? They did it by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. He said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. They tether and they get his hands. Often what that means is that they would pull him up around a pole, exposing his back. And we can go on and read about the many times that Paul had been tortured, how he had been whipped 39 less 1. I can only imagine the physical scars that would be on Paul's body and the brokenness of what he would be. And as they get ready to scourge him and they get ready to whip him, the commander demands an explanation of the riot. It must have been a strange sight for a Roman commander, Paul, seeing him as a prisoner, seeing this a crowd being so engaged and then erupting. I don't know if he spoke Hebrew. I don't know if he understood what Paul was saying to him. But could you imagine as a Roman commander standing there watching everybody and everybody's eyes, everybody's calm, everybody's good, then all of a sudden, get him! You know, I mean, here comes the torches and the pitchforks again. Let's get him again. He said, we're going to get to the bottom of this. So we read, but when it was explained to him, he must have thought, what an absurd offense. Wait a minute. Let me pull this back in. I know our time's getting away, but please let me pull this back in. If you was the Roman commander, he said, I want to find out, why are they so angry at you, Paul? What's going on? They're mad at you because you wanted to they're accusing you of bringing a Gentile in. And you know what? Who was this Roman commander? Guess what he would have been? A Roman Gentile. Or he would have been a Gentile. He's like, wait a minute. They don't like you because you like people like me? That's crazy, isn't it? He understood, I mean, in her mind, like, why do they dislike you so much? Because you like people like me, and yet I'm going to whip you to be examined under scourging. I got to read this to you. It may seem brutal and customary, but only upon people who were not Roman citizens. They would do this. They would put this kind of torture to somebody who was not a Roman citizen. Verses 25 through 29. I'm coming to a close. And here Paul's going to reveal something very intriguing to this Roman guard. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion, centurions over 100, that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? Whoa, wait, hold on. Do what? You're fixing to whip a Roman citizen. He pulled out his Roman citizen card. He says, I'm a Roman citizen. Now, you couldn't just throw that out there and not, because the punishment would have been far worse than a scourging if you said you was a Roman citizen and didn't. He said, you're about to whip a Roman. Well, when the centurion, you know, a centurion's over 100. Think of a century. This guy's over 100. He had to go to his higher up. He had to go to his commanding officer. And he went into the chief captain saying, take heed what thou doest to this man. He's a Roman. He's a Roman citizen. Then the chief captain came and said unto them, tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, yep. And the chief captain answered, with a great sum I obtained my freedom. Now when I read that, I had to do some research. With a great sum, I had to obtain my freedom. It was something that he had to pay a high price for. It was not something that you were supposed to buy. You had to get your Roman citizen either by being born in Rome and Roman citizen. You either had to be awarded it. But this guy's saying, I bought mine. I had to pay for my Roman citizenship. Looking at you, looking at the shape you're in, looking at how much you don't have, how in the world have they cheapened being a Roman citizen to this? And he said, I was born into it. I was born a Roman citizen. I don't know what his grandpa did. I don't know what his dad may have done. But somewhere, maybe just by being of Tarsus, he was born a Roman citizen. He had that. I mean, just think about, you want to pull your ranking card. You may have bought yours and cheated, but I've got mine by birthright. And Paul said, but I was freeborn. Then straightway they departed from him which should have examined him, and the chief captain. So here you saw everybody else get out, and he goes over and unlocks it and says, hey, we don't want no trouble here. And on the morrow, because he would have known with certainty wherefore he was accused of, the Jews, he loosened him from the bands and commanded the chief priest. He said, but I'm still going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to have the chief priest come up. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have everybody sit down. We're going to have this. I'm going to get you, and we're going to have it guarded, and it's not going to be a mob, and it's not going to be a mess, and we're going to make sure we're going to rationalize this out. You know who he's going to get? The Sanhedrin. The Jewish Sanhedrin here. Paul has to be thinking in his mind, I know our time has come, but I want you to get this. I got to give you a big cliffhanger for next time. Last week, Paul had went to the crowd. He'd been in the temple. He'd gotten up there and he got ready, and he gets to share his entire testimony with everybody out there witnessing and hearing. Now what's going to happen? He says you're going to stand before the Sanhedrin and you're going to have to explain to them what happens. I don't know how that might sound to some. They may be scared to death to say, I have to go before the Sanhedrin, anything but that. No, not before the whole big council of all. And you know, I can only imagine Paul saying, I've sat on that council before. I too was on the Sanhedrin. I too was there to say thumbs up or thumbs down with individuals. And now I'm going to get an opportunity to go back and to share with my peers about the name of Jesus Christ. For me, the best illustration I could give would be like going back to my high school reunion. I could only imagine going back before the class and them all knowing me the way that I was and who I was, and seeing me grow up probably from kindergarten, knowing me and knowing the things, and saying, Jason, we'd like for you to be able to have just a segment in just a moment to be able to share with this group. If I ever had an opportunity to be able to go back to my high school class and share with them anything about what I've been doing over the past umpteen years, if I ever had that platform, I hope and pray I could be as Paul to be able to share with them Jesus Christ. That's what I hope all of us could do. Well, our time has come. I have many more notes, but I think that you've got the gist of the scene. Paul has the opportunity of a lifetime to be able to go back and share in Jerusalem with the whole Sanhedrin about what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Would you all stand with me this evening? And Steve, we don't often